My name is Yaniv Korem. I'm here to study successful innovation professionals and uncover the mindset and models they use to de-risk the future. On this podcast, I invite fellow professors, practitioners, and entrepreneurs to have an honest conversation about the business of innovation. No more bullshit. We talk openly and honestly about what works and what doesn't. So come on, get your ass in that seat. School's about to start. Okay, Brian, let's get started. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. I just finished another call. Looking forward to this one. And it's a beautiful day in Lisbon right now. So excited to talk to you.
Fantastic. What are you up to in Lisbon? What are you doing in Lisbon?
We were never supposed to be in Lisbon, but I'm supposed to be based in Shanghai. Obviously, the whole virus situation is happening, and we were there for most of that time. But then, after it started getting better, we were thinking like, it's probably not that bad. Let's just go out and do some exploration, because we were planning to move to around the world and see what other markets we can go to, my girlfriend and I. And Lisbon was on the map. So we said, okay, let's just go there now and check it out. But it turns out we're stuck here. So the Chinese government has restricted travel into the country, no matter if you have a passport or a visa or whatever.
Wow.
No, if you have a passport, obviously a Chinese passport can get in, I think. But there's no more flights anyway. So we're stuck here. We're very happy to be stuck here. It's not one of those like, I can't go back. No, we're fine.
Yeah.
Life is good.
Yeah.
And I think we're in a really blessed position.
That's good. So typically you go to Lisbon for the tourism, obviously, but also for Web Summit, right? Because that's where they host.
I haven't been there for Web Summit. Yeah. Have you been there for Web Summit?
I was invited. Was it this? No, last year. But I couldn't go. I had a business conflict. I was supposed to open one of the VC panels, but I couldn't go. So I've never been to Lisbon or Web Summit. Cool. Yeah, it's supposed like the whole city comes alive. That's what I've been told.
Sure, right.
And I think, just to make one more point, you should maybe think about trademarking what you said about Lisbon. We were never supposed to be in Lisbon.
Oh, yeah.
That would be an awesome
one, right?
Yeah.
We're never supposed to be here, man. But make that a T-shirt, make it a hat.
Exactly. That's the moneymaker right there. I think you should sell it to their board of tourism and retire early.
There you go. Screw this innovation stuff.
Exactly. But since we're on a podcast called The School of Innovation, and we're gonna talk about innovation, we're supposed to talk about innovation. I wanted to share a quick story that I'm hoping would frame or provide some context for this conversation. So it starts off really bad, as in I was trying for, I guess, the last couple of years to launch an innovation agency, and I failed miserably. All right. It has always been my dream. I was one of those people who would follow the ideals and fjords and the designs of the world, and I always said to myself, I could do that. And I stumbled onto a consulting gig in Hong Kong and in Shanghai, and that's how I basically got into Asia. And as I was doing that, it occurred to me that maybe this was the time to do that. Maybe this was the time to venture on my own and start that innovation agency. And I did that, and it failed. Now, why am I telling you this story? Why am I telling everyone this story? It's because you have a similar story, but with a happier ending, because you founded Let's Make Great, and it actually succeeded. Like, you have an agency, you've got a team. It looks like you're doing something right. So I'm hoping that on this conversation, I can kind of pick your brain about what did you do and and how did you succeed in doing that?
Yeah, it's a really crazy story, man. I totally understand that. I think, you know what, it makes me think back to when I started. It was around 7 years ago, 2013, January 2013, and really to get to that point, you have to think like the years before that. And I think there was a lot of news and a lot of talk about innovation at the time. And I think design thinking really hit its fever pitch around then, and I was bitten by the bug because originally I'm not a designer, I'm not a consultant, I'm not much of anything really. Um, I don't have any higher education. I don't speak Chinese, not that well at least. And yeah, so how did I do that? I think
How
it's a
did you
really
do
hard
that?
question. Yeah, I think it's really hard to answer that question. Here's what I think. My approach maybe is not exactly as, because I didn't know anything about it. I was a
Hmm.
lot more of an entrepreneur, and I think there was like these two trends that were coming about, right? Innovation and design thinking, and then startup culture and entrepreneurship life. And I think those two really informed my kind of mindset going into it, as well as just being from New Jersey and having immigrant parents. I think we were very much about the hustle, very much about doing it yourself, and so I think I took that all that DNA, and I never really looked at it as an innovation agency. I loved all those agencies you just mentioned. I really admire them, and I try to study them as much as I can. But uh, I looked at it more from a business point of view
Hmm.
and from a business model point of view, instead of just the straightforward innovation agency kind of thing. Partially because I don't know what it would. I've never been in one, so I have no idea what it would mean. But secondarily, it's just like I had to do it my way, and I think there was a lot of challenges along the way, but that was my starting point.
I,
That
I
basic
think
mindset.
I think that's smart. I think starting from, like what you said, starting from the business model is smart because as designers, design consultants, design thinking consultants, whatever you want to call that, we are very um, hopeful, optimistic, and visual, and
Yeah.
we buy into that dream. So, I you see those images of rooms full of post-its on the walls, people like going crazy with
Yeah.
Sharpies, and they're all good looking and they're all enjoying themselves, and you're like, yes, I want that life. I want that freedom. I want that excitement. I want to be, and thinking of it from the business side, I think is interesting. The fact that you didn't know how these things operated and you had to study those. I'm assuming as you were doing, right, like on the
Hmm.
go.
Hmm.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, eventually I started to figure it out, right? I think I knew that I didn't know, and I knew what I had to rely on basically what I was able to do. And so I took, going back to that business and entrepreneurial mindset point of view, I was very practical about it. And being from New Jersey again, I guess this ties into a lot, but I think I have a big mouth. I could talk, and so I have the gift of gab. I've been able to, and I was, believe it or not, I was just basically an English teacher when I got to China in 2007, and that
Wow.
really honed my craft in learning how to present and host the room or own the room. And so that combined with the New Jersey thing, I have this kind of bravado. So I have this stage presence. And that kind of became the anchor point that I could build the rest of the business around.
Wow.
And I started off with just that because I could talk and I could think and I knew how to do a little bit of training. Those are basically the three
Hmm.
starting services that I had. I just offered what I could and I took whatever I could get very, very early on. Because again, I didn't know any better. I couldn't say that this was the right or wrong thing. I could just say that this is leading to a sale opportunity, and
Hmm.
even if it's not, maybe it's leading to something. And I kept a very open mind about it. To make that a little more tangible, I think what I started with was that I told all my friends that I wanted to help create the next 100 years of innovation in China, and I just told everybody I could. told my family, and they were not supportive. They were like, "Who
What?
you
Yeah.
you're gonna help?" No, I don't think so. But some friends, they're also quite supportive. The ones in corporate, they're like, they don't get it at all. They just said, "No, why don't you just charge much lower rates and get much and work every day?"
Yeah.
It was just they
Yeah.
didn't understand the position of an innovation agency, a creative consultancy. Um, and eventually I ran out of friends and I had to tell strangers. But every time I was telling them about my vision of the next 100 years of innovation in China, they were able to give me questions that
Hmm.
sharpened my conversational skills, my sales skills, and helped me understand what I was trying to build. And from that, where am I going with this? Is that I told one friend, and one friend in particular, and he had this job that he couldn't do because it really wasn't what he was offering, the services he offered. It was
Hmm.
around helping a university in America to create a hackathon in China for a week. And he's like, I don't know anything about that, but do you want to try? And he
Hmm.
had an established company, so he didn't want to risk it, I guess. And he also wanted to help a friend out, and so he gave me that opportunity. And that school, that university, happened to be my dream university, New York University. I grew up in New Jersey. It's NYU is based in Manhattan and their main campus, and I'd always admired that school just because it was like, I don't know, all the glamour of New York plus that transitional phase of your college during college, right?
Hmm.
So they were my first clients, and I'm very, very honored to have them. But it started just by talking and sharing that crazy, stupid, ridiculous vision that I had of the next 100 years of innovation.
I think that's genius. I mean, how did you? So as you were talking, I'm noticing more and more things that I was, I guess, not paying attention to as I was trying to build my own innovation consultancy because I was looking at it as a very superficial thing where this is what I wanted to do, but I
Mm-hmm.
didn't articulate why I wanted to do it. And then
Mm-hmm.
you came from the other side and said, okay, this is my vision, right? This is my mission. How did you come up with that? How did you come up with
Yeah,
this sentence?
it took a lot of reflection, and I think when I first started off, I didn't have the exact phrase, but through, like I said before, the conversations and the challenges from other people, I was able to slowly sharpen it. And as you're having a conversation, like every conversation is, you say different things, and part of what I do is I really pay attention to the eyes of other people
Hmm.
and their facial reactions. And so I think I must have said it, and somebody reacted in a certain way, and then I started to reuse that key phrase in the next conversation. For example, basically
Right.
prototyping my vision statement through
Looking for
live
signals.
conversation, right? Exactly, and trying to get that feedback. And so that's how I did it in a very rough way. But the core of it before that was reflecting deeply on like the past 7 years of my career,
Hmm.
the major decisions for me, decision points like why did I choose the university I chose, why did I choose the major I chose, um, why did I decide to go to China, why did I decide to take that first job in Washington D.C.
Hmm.
And I looked at every critical decision point for me, and I try to look at my motivation for each of those. And from there, I saw this kind of, I imagine a scatter chart, like a bunch of dots on a graph.
Hmm.
And I could see that the dots were, there was a trend line. And that trend
Right.
line was doing this work of creativity and innovation. I couldn't verbalize that at the time, but through that reflection, I started to see it in my mind's eye, and I started to feel it. And then through conversation, it started to become a lot more verbalized, and the phrases started to come out a little more clearly. So
Yeah.
as abstract as that process is, as I'm telling to you now,
Mhm.
um, that's what I did.
That's fantastic. No, it makes a lot of sense. And I want to take that vision of yours and I want to try to unpack it. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, And like the first thing, so if I'm looking at it as a creative consultancy focused on the next 100 years, uh, why did you choose creative consultancy as opposed to innovation consultancy? Why that word?
Again, I think that's really interesting because I think partially it was luck in the sense that I don't know, I didn't know what innovation was. I was very open-minded, and I just had the sense that creativity was a little more directly connected to who I was.
Mhm.
Um, I think the vision is to create an innovation agency. Even now, 7.5 years later, I'm still not there. And I think just creativity consultancy allowed me to flex my mental muscles and also be more open-minded to different possibilities. So that's why I chose creativity consultancy.
Yeah.
Along the way, of course, creative agencies like advertising agencies,
Right.
they kind of get confused because they don't know what I am.
Yeah.
Um, but that's okay. I don't really compete with them. I don't really talk to them that much. They try to hire me very often, or they do have some requests for the kind of services I provide.
Mhm.
But I don't. It just never worked out. So there hasn't been too many agencies that I've worked with as like on the
Okay.
client side. But
Okay.
yeah, just around that key point of creative consultant in the sense that uh, I started off as a trainer, breaking that word down into even further,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Creativity is on that one side. The consulting was, I started off as a trainer, but I knew, and I know still, that it's not what I am meant to do. A lot more of a business person. And I think more broadly, I love philosophy and psychology training and coaching and personal development. But at the
Mhm.
same time, I love design, aesthetics, um, and strategy. So,
Yeah.
what is that then,
Yeah.
right?
How do you put that
Uh,
thing
you know,
together?
and so
Yeah.
it's kind of unfair, but I just mashed it all together, and I called it a creativity consultancy. I didn't care so much about it.
Yeah.
I didn't want to give it a label. Our philosophy was let the client fill the blanks with their own
Mhm.
mind rather than me explaining to them directly what we do.
Yeah.
So I just say, this is what I am. This is what I like to do. This is where my passions are. If you want,
Mhm.
you can work with me. I would love to work with you on these certain things. And slowly it started to take shape.
Yeah. I think that's a key point. I think taking action and having your actions, be your words, speak for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, that's smart. And but like on the flip side of that, like the stuff that I've been listening to a lot, where you're trying to sort of shape your positioning, that
Mm-hmm.
having that very clear positioning, very everyone says, go niche. Um,
Yeah.
it also helps you a lot in terms of targeting and marketing, because you know who you're speaking to, you know who your audience are,
Mm-hmm.
you know what problem you solve for them,
Mm-hmm.
and so I guess I wanted to reflect the other side of like what you were just saying. I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think, if you're going to truly be creative, you have to understand there are no rules, right? And so I think I did have that as a significant pushback from a lot of my peers, a lot of my friends, and people that cared about me. They said, no, what's your niche? What's your
Mhm.
niche? What do you do? What's the problem that you solve? And,
Yeah.
and I think as a consultancy, we just don't play like that. I think as a creative person, we just don't think like that. Um, and but at the same time, thinking again from a business perspective, you have to be practical about it. If that's what you're going to say, you also have to counterbalance that to make that a reality.
Mhm. Right. Have something to
Right.
show, right? Have something to
Mm-hmm.
show and say, right. When I think of a chair and you think of a chair, it's 100% we're thinking on different chairs, right? But if
A
there's
hundred
a
percent. Yeah.
100%, but if there's a chair in the room, right, we can both point to it and say, okay, that chair, right?
Right.
And so I guess
And being very
having,
practical in
yeah,
that way. On the other side, from a business model perspective, realizing that I couldn't take on significant expenses. And so I lived very, very meagerly. And I think that's the entrepreneurial side of the business, of my mindset, was that
mhm,
I refused to take any fixed costs. I refused to take on any salaried staff. And it was all freelancers and partners that are willing to share the risk and share the reward with me. And then not having an office space, not spending anything on any kind of website, anything like that, but build it all yourself. And this was, again, 7 years ago. So a little bit different time period. And just being very practical. I use that word again and again and again, because it's so true.
Yeah.
Do it yourself and minimize every single cost. Because I think about that now, and that's how I hope that we can survive this next crisis. As budgets become leaner and people are not looking for work or not looking for consultants, then what are people going to do? So I expect to get some projects. From the last time that we talked to this time, we were able to get one, but I don't expect too many more in the future.
Yeah.
So having this model perspective and keeping costs super, super, super low, I think that's how we were able to survive as long as we were, going back to that original question that you had.
Right. I also think I want to highlight another interesting thing here, specifically about the power of that mission statement, because in these times of crisis, but not just, right, as you were building this thing, I'm thinking having that confidence and that mission statement really helped you to attract the right people, right?
Yes, exactly. Because I was able to, first of all, it started with a client, and that client kind of inspired the next client, and that one inspired the next client. And along the way, even with the first client, NYU, we were able to do the hackathon for them. Or, I say we, but it was really me at that time, right?
Yeah.
But at that first hackathon, one of the professors of the program came up to me and said, "Hey, you're interested in doing innovation in China? I have one of my students who's just coming back from NYU in New York, and he's Shanghainese, and he wants to do the same exact thing as you. He's really passionate about education. You two should talk." And we started talking, and eventually Lei became one of my first business partners for Let's Make Great, and we just got along so well. And eventually it was a slow path there, because we just wanted to fill each other out. I think each of us are cautious but open-minded. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we were checking to see if this really could be something. And
That's interesting.
and the chemistry was there because we both had that vision. We've verbalized it in different ways, but we understood that we wanted to make impact in a very non-traditional way.
Yeah. And this was in 2007, right?
2013, 2007, I got to China.
Okay. Okay. So you got to China in 2007. So yeah, my question, I guess, going back to the mission statement, was why China? And I guess you kind of hinted at why right now, but like, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
why China at that time?
Well, I'm ethnically Chinese, and I think most people will automatically assume that's why I went to China. But
But you don't
my
speak
parents are from
Chinese.
Hong Kong. I don't speak Chinese. My parents are from Hong Kong. I was born in New York City, and I spent the first 23 years, 24 years of my life in America. I had been to Hong Kong once in all that time.
Wow.
I don't even speak Cantonese, the dialect in Hong Kong. So I'm pretty much as ignorant and as stupid as it gets. And so, why China? My parents still ask me that, like, what are you thinking? You were that kid that hated it, right? I dropped out of Chinese school after like a week. Every kid has to go to Chinese school. As a young, like 8-year-old or whatever it is, I dropped out after a week. I'm like, this is not going to happen.
Wow.
My parents let me. And so why? So 07, 06, I started thinking about it. 06, I went to Paris and I lived there for 3 months and I loved it. It was just a beautiful experience. And I realized the world was much bigger than New Jersey, much bigger than Washington, D.C. And I was like, okay, maybe, the wine is good, the food is good, the people are amazing. And I'm having a time of my life. How can I do this more? And so that's why I started looking at other options. And I had this kind of crazy fantasy. I was reading an article in the New York Times um, about a writer that was living in Shanghai, an American writer that was living in Shanghai, and she made it her adopted home, and
Hmm.
she wrote about it just in such beautiful, colorful language, obviously. And she talked about how you know, you can walk through the lanes, you can look through people's homes, and you know, there was
Yeah.
a sense of charm, but at the same time, there was this driving force of change, of cultural change, of economic change, um, of just like the people themselves, right? This
Right.
kind of
Right.
renaissance. And so that was like, I was like, okay, that's where I need to be.
Hmm.
And it just sounded like it was going to be the future. And and in some ways, you know, my parents, they moved from Hong Kong to New York City in the 70s, where, you know, New York was very much the future at
Yeah.
that time.
For the same
And
reasons. Yeah.
so exactly. And I was like, okay, maybe that's a good reason. You know, this is all in retrospect. After some reflection, I can see that now, those kind of parallels.
Hmm.
But you know, when you're a 23-year-old kid, you're like, no, I just want to go to the future. I just want to be where it's most important to be.
Right.
And and then on top of it, '08, the Olympics were starting. It
That's
was the
right.
Beijing Olympics,
Right.
and so that all of that combined together made me gave me the motivation and the opportunity to come out to Shanghai and just experiment.
So, so what were you doing there when you first arrived? Like,
Yeah, I like I said, I taught English.
you taught
I was a very
English.
bad English teacher because I didn't know what that meant to be an English teacher. But my students quickly corrected me, and I adjusted. Um,
And
yeah,
yeah.
and really, I mean, that's what I say is teaching English was the mechanism, but the motivation was really to find myself and to rebuild myself and to figure out who I could be. At least an early starting point. I
Okay.
think going back a little further, my parents, because they're from Hong Kong, they were immigrants. They moved to New York in the '70s and grew up there in the '80s. Um, they were very conservative and they were very afraid of a lot of things. There was a lot of
Mhm.
crime and a lot of danger, and so they moved to a very far, like a pretty far away place from New York, like an hour away, and because the education was good there supposedly,
Yeah.
but it's the suburbs. It's very isolated, and they moved for safety,
Yeah.
and and that defined my whole life. Just making decisions based on safety,
Hmm.
and and so this is what I mean by switching, not just look at the mechanism, but look at the motivation. I started to take steps to be a little bit less safe. And China was one of those early steps. Shanghai, being an English teacher, was an early step. I needed to continue eventually
Yeah.
to experiment with safety or the lack thereof, or the perception of safety
Right.
and risk to get to that point.
That concludes part one of my conversation with Brian Tam. Tune in next week for part two.